have a battle here with our own Arctic apple here in the Okanagan. Somehow they want to introduce a GMO apple that won't brown. By doing so, of course, we've been told, and the fruit growers have been telling the government that this will threaten their livelihood because of cross-pollination and that nobody will want to buy any of our other apples. But so we're trying to keep this fight going, and Alan's certainly been instrumental in that. You know, we'll see the economic devastation of farmers if that happens. Much the same as if they introduce genetically modified alfalfa, which has been approved, but still has not been introduced into the environment in Canada. I know there's a concern, certainly amongst farmers in Ontario, where they're planning on introducing GMO alfalfa that nobody needs and nobody wants, but it will just certainly contaminate non-GMO alfalfa, and then we'll be in the same position. So we got to keep the struggle there. When we talk about, you know, we can talk about economic issues. And the bill I had before Parliament 474 a couple of years ago dealt with the economic hit to the pocketbook of GMOs, but there is a bigger issue, and that's health. There have been no long-term studies on GMOs and the impact of human health anywhere. Any studies that have been done on GMOs have been industry-based, and government has basically just rubber-stamped them. Our own government, the American government, and others use what they call the principle of substantial equivalency. So if a GMO crop or plant looks the same, tastes the same, and smells the same as a non-GMO, then it's considered to be safe or equivalent. You know, there's been muzzling going on in the industry. A gentleman by the name of Seralini in France has done studies. I've actually had the privilege of meeting him when I was first elected in 2006. He told me that he was noticing, I think it was Monsanto 810 corn, doing studies and noticing liver defects and birth defects in rats using that specific GMO corn. He continued his work and published in one of the journals, scientific journals, and lo and behold, as you've been following this, his study was pulled from the journal by the new editor. The new editor happened to be a former employee of Monsanto. What
a shock,
an example of what's happening. That's why all of us are here. That's why I like podium. The main ingredient when we look at GMOs, there's basically two traits. One makes them herbicide tolerant, so you can spray the heck out of them with glyphosate and Roundup, and the other one makes them resistant to bugs, so if a bug eats it, it dies. That's the only two traits that really exist in GMOs today in the world. And so we have to question the use of glyphosate in Roundup, which is Roundup Ready. And we also know that now we're getting weeds that are being resistant to Roundup. So what they're doing is they're introducing stronger chemicals and making GMO plants tolerant to stronger chemicals. And one of them is the same chemical that's included or that was used in Agent Orange. So in other words, when plants become resistant to the current herbicides, they crank up the strength of the herbicides, and all of that, of course, somewhere winds up in the food chain. Glyphosate itself has been used not only with GMOs, but it's used as a weed killer. And there's another phenomenon in a study that I've just read, and I found out about this years ago in Saskatchewan. My cousin, his name was also Alex. He was a grain farmer. And he said, Alex, I'm going to desiccate today. I don't know how many of you ever heard of desiccation. Desiccation is when you've got a crop ready to harvest, a crop of wheat, for example, and then you spray the heck out of it with Roundup to kill it, to dry it. So prior to going to combining, the crop is sprayed with Roundup, and then it's combined. And so the question I posed to Alex years ago, and I said, well, wouldn't that wind up in the food chain? And we kind of agreed that it would. So where are we today then? If we eat sugar, the sugar probably comes from sugar beets from Alberta, which are GMOs. if it comes from sugarcane in Central America, it's probably been desiccated prior to harvest. If we eat canola, canola is GMO. We eat soya, soya is GMO. And then, of course, we have wheat, which has probably been desiccated. So the study that I looked at, that I read, which was an interesting one called Glyphosate Pathways to Modern Diseases, and it talked about the fact that it talked about the disease of celiac disease, it's gluten intolerant. And there's a correlation, there appears to be a correlation between the increase of glyphosate and the increase of gluten intolerance. In North America, 5% of the people suffer from gluten intolerance. There's also a risk, apparently, to the study according to thyroid disease, kidney failure, and cancer. Sugarcane workers that I earlier mentioned that are working on fields desiccated with glyphosate, there's a surge in kidney failure amongst these workers. And also glyphosate may be a contributor to the obesity epidemic and autism epidemics in the U.S., as well as other diseases such as Alzheimer's. This is a study from a scientific journal that's just been published. So what should be done? Well, in Canada, we need to have
Faden, if you'd like. Just stay where Mom can see you. You can run if you'd like. Just stay where I can see you, love.
We need to support Alan and others, and Alan's going to FCM.
Go ahead, honey. Just stay where I see you.
Support the idea that we need no more introduction of GMOs. And also,
yeah, please.
We need to make GMOs an election issue so that each party has to be pinpointed on their stance with what they're going to do in regard to this very important health issue. And I would like to submit that we need to ensure that our government conducts government-sponsored independent studies on the effects of GMOs to our health. These are two concrete things we can do.
Yeah.
The third thing that we can do is we can push to have compulsory labeling of GMOs so that at least until we make that decision, we have a choice. So those are the three things we need to take into the next election to pinpoint people such as Dick and Barbara and all those other people who want to represent us in this area. And finally, if I have a couple of minutes, I just want to close by talking about food sovereignty and the control of the food supply. We have one of the threats to our control of the food supply, of course, is the proposed changes to the Agricultural Land Reserve, the ALR. And I know that many people, I was at a rally a month or two ago in Kelowna against this, what's happening with this government. And I'd like to say, at this time, I'd like to thank the current Minister of Agriculture for at least opening this up for debate and at least getting submissions. And I just written a letter to him actually last week in regard to this. That there should be no changes to the ALR. We should be increasing land for agricultural production.
Woo! Yes.
Earlier on, Kevin mentioned Bill C-18. This is an agricultural omnibus bill where they try to ram through everything on agriculture into one bill. And one of the things they're doing is they're changing the seed tax. And right now we have a convention, a seed convention called, it's the French acronym UPOP 71, which seems to work just fine. This government, through this C-18, wants to introduce UPOP 91. And I'll tell you folks, ever since I became elected, I've worked hand in hand with the National Farmers Union, hand in hand with people such as yourselves in the food sovereignty movement. I crisscrossed the country a couple of times, before my study came out of food sovereignty, and the message I keep getting was we should never introduce UPOP 91. This should never be part of any agreement we make. Well, lo and behold, we have it right there in Bill C-18. So I have a chance on Monday, I'll be speaking against this and trying to lay out and try to convince, put my argument forward. So that this bill will not be passed. But it empowers, it empowers governments to remove, restrict, or limit farmers' seed-saving privilege by passing regulations process that can happen quickly and without debate. There's also the provision there for these companies to collect royalties, not only at the time they sell the seeds,